Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks as legislators for the rich diversity of our history. We welcome the many challenges of the present. We dedicate ourselves to both the present and the future as we join in the service of Alberta and Canada. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present a petition on behalf of 30 businessmen and women involved in the electronic communications industry in Alberta. These Albertan business people protest the unfair competition they are facing from AGT's Special Products Division.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the annual report of Westera Institute of Technology as required by statute.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton, Meadowlark, followed by Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I am pleased to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 8 business people from the electronics communication industry in Alberta. These distinguished and concerned citizens are Sheila, and I would ask them to rise as I announce their name, Sheila Barnes, Larry Mazaros, Gary Lines, Ken Kenton, Len McElrick, Daryl Halawachuk, John Brugman, and Eric Thompson. I would ask the members of the Legislative Assembly to join me in welcoming them today.
Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm very pleased to introduce to you and through you and to all members of this Assembly an invasion of 97 grade 6 students from the Athabasca Elementary School. The town of Athabasca is a beautiful community nestled in the historic Athabasca River Valley, 90 miles north of Edmonton. They are accompanied by 4 of their teachers, Mr. Ron Galenka, Mrs. Lucy Barry, Mrs. Dorothy Ryan, Mr. Larry Armfeld, and also by 2 school bus drivers, Mr. Harry Panelik and Mr. Bruce Polsky. They are seated in the members' gallery, and would they please rise and receive the warm welcome from this Assembly.
Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, seated in the members' gallery today are 20 grade 6 students from the Crestwood School who are accompanied by their assistant principal, Mr. Chomik. I would ask them to rise and receive the cordial welcome of this Assembly.
Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to introduce to you and to the members of the Assembly this afternoon 29 students in grade 6 from Greenview School, located only a block from my home in the constituency of Edmonton Millwoods. They're accompanied today by 2 of their teachers, Mr. Don Briggs and Mr. Jerry Middlestat. They're seated in the public gallery. I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements.
Mr. Speaker, in cooperation with the Tourism Industry Association of Canada's National Tourism Week Committee, Alberta Tourism has established a provincial committee to coordinate activities in celebration of this first ever national and provincial event. The objective of National Tourism Week is to raise the Canadian public's understanding of the importance of the ambassadorial, social and economic roles of tourism in Canada. The slogan for National Tourism Week is Canada Grows with Tourism. Celebrate National Tourism Week, May 11th to 17th. Alberta Tourism has adapted this slogan for provincial use to read Alberta Grows with Tourism. Each year, increasing numbers of communities and businesses in Alberta and Canada organize events and programs designed to heighten the awareness of and the importance of tourism.
Order, please, in the House.
Minister, please.
To heighten the awareness of the importance of tourism to foster increased hospitality. National Tourism Week has been established to provide a unifying banner for these efforts and to encourage greater involvement at the local, regional, and national levels. Therefore, as Minister of Tourism, I am extremely pleased to declare May 11th to 17th, 1987 as National Tourism Week in Alberta. And I call on all Albertans to join their fellow Canadians to commemorate and celebrate this country's first annual Tourism Week. I join with Alberta's tourism industry in reminding you of the economic importance of an industry that expected to be the leading industry in the world by the year 2000. Tourism in Alberta employs over 100,000 residents and contributes $2.3 billion to our economy. Last year, we had one of our best tourism years in the past decade. Tourism offers us an opportunity to play a host for approximately 5.8 million visitors, contributing to national and international understanding and goodwill. Tourism is a renewable resource that enriches our province by supporting the preservation of our historic heritage and culture and enhancing the lives of residents and visitors alike. Tourism brings thousands of visitors to experience our great province and our friendly people, and I urge every Albertan to join all of Canada in a salute to tourism industry and the celebration of National Tourism Week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly have no objection to celebrating National Tourism Week in Alberta. All of us, I'm sure, in both sides of the House are well aware of the importance of tourism to our economy and perhaps the fact that it could grow and be even more important to our industries in Alberta in the future. But of course, much work has to be done. But rather than rhetoric and telling people how much we love them and everything else and how important they are, I have a very specific suggestion to the Minister, and perhaps he can talk to the Treasurer. We still haven't heard that the hotel and hotel room tax could be eliminated and $9 million put back into the tourism industry. It's a very specific suggestion, Mr. Speaker, that contrary to what the government says, if they're for tourism, taking that sort of money out of the tourism industry was not particularly helpful. So maybe rather than rhetoric, Mr. Speaker, we'll see the provincial treasurer move in that area.
Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Mr. Speaker, following the Minister's edict to the Workers' Compensation Board to cut benefits to injured workers, officials of the Workers' Compensation Board have been stuck with the job of implementing what I consider irrational and arbitrary cuts ordered by this minister. Mr. Speaker, the Executive Director of the Claims Services has advised the Board that implementation of the minister's directive will require cancellation of important and hard-won protections for injured workers. My question to the minister is straightforward. Will the minister now confirm that his interventions have caused legitimate claimants to be cut off arbitrarily?
No, Mr. Speaker, I will not.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have a memorandum in front of me from that particular director, and it's very clear that he's listing a number of changes that are to take place and that have already occurred and have cut people off, Mr. Speaker. And I want this minister to come clean now that we have the evidence in front of us. Will the minister confirm that what he has done then is to force the board to interpret the regulations in a way which is arbitrary and unfair to injured workers and their families, and that these changes of interpretation have resulted in an explosion in the number of appeals?
No, Mr. Speaker, I will not.
Well, Mr. Speaker, then the minister obviously doesn't know what's going on at the Workers' Compensation Board. That's a type of silly answer that we expect from this minister. My question is, in this memorandum, the Executive Director of Claims Services has written of the consequences of the minister's letter of November the 12th, And I would ask him this question: does the minister agree with Mr. Wysocki's conclusion that significant philosophic and policy gains for workers will be lost as a result of the minister's directive, including things such as the cancellation of the benefit of doubt and the cancellation of the Charter of Rights for Workers?
No, Mr. Speaker, clearly I will not.
Mr. Speaker, I guess the minister is not aware then of this memorandum. I'd certainly be glad to let him know what's going on over at the Workers' Compensation Board. But he also goes on to list other regressive things that should be done, and some of them have already started to occur. For instance, psychologists and physical therapists will be redeployed into cost-cutting functions rather than their normal jobs. Claims counseling, claims policy, and research in other areas will be shut down. I could go on, Mr. Speaker, but these are things that are already happening. Mr. Speaker, my question to this minister, now that it is well documented the chaos that's occurring to injured workers and to the department as a result of this minister's directive to the board, will he now have the courtesy to withdraw that memo and let the board get on with the mandate that they're supposed to without political interference from this minister?
No, Mr. Speaker, to answer the honourable member's last question, I will not. I will continue to exercise my responsibility in asking the board to ensure that they pay injured workers all of which they're entitled to, no more and no less, and that where an injured worker has a need that goes beyond entitlement, we will assist that worker with his dealings with the Social Services Department or the Unemployment Insurance Commission.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. Surely outside the announced intention to get rid of the 20% increase in benefits paid that the Minister has fondly referred to a number of times, there must have been some research here or something provoked him into this move. Could he share with the legislature what study, what research, or what scientific basis he had to suddenly decide to tighten up on workmen's compensation?
Mr. Speaker, the scientific basis was one that we witnessed that in 1986, the cost of claims rose by 20% over the previous year, when in fact there was no increase in the number of claims. And there was no associated cost or amount in the severity of the injuries or the accidents that took place, certainly not in the order of 20%.
Supplementary, Goldbar, Cloverbar.
Speaker, to the Minister, Mr. Minister, I've sat on that committee, the review committee, several times as my responsibility as a member of this legislature. The Minister has stated in this Assembly that the Workmen's Compensation Board is an autonomous body. Now, can the Minister indicate to the Assembly and the people of this province what the rationale is that many people are phoning us as MLAs and saying our benefits have been reduced or completely eliminated? Was there a direction from the Minister, a direct representation by the Minister to review these, the funding and to make the cuts? Was there a directive from the Minister?
Mr. Speaker, there was a directive from me back in November of 1986 that the board was to look at two things. One, it was to look at the situation as I've just described it with respect to the amount of compensation, the amount of cost of claims vis-a-vis the number of claims, and to take appropriate action to find out why that was the case and to bring those claims costs properly in line, in keeping with the board's responsibility to pay to injured workers on the basis of what they're entitled to under the law and under the regulations. And, Mr. Speaker, it is an autonomous board, but I have a responsibility as the Minister for reporting to this Assembly to provide that agency with proper direction with respect to policy as agreed to by the government.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, my questions this afternoon are also to the Minister responsible for the Workers' Compensation Board, and I'd like to ask him questions as to how his policies, cost-cutting policies, are affecting working Albertans injured at their work sites. Mr. Speaker, this minister is loosening regulations on the use of vinyl chloride monomers. He's not putting strong defined exposure limits in his draft regulations for coal dust, silica, and asbestos, and he's not acting on the dangers posed by exposure to isocyanates. In view of these abdications of leadership, why is it the policy of this minister to cut the benefits to workers whose lungs are damaged by exposure to fumes in the workplace? He seems to be punishing the victims of his policy. Why has he adopted that policy, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, we have adopted no such policy, and in keeping with this government's practice, before it puts in place appropriate regulations, it has gone out and consulted with all of those who will be affected by the regulations, and I am awaiting the results of that consultation process.
Mr. Speaker, my questions today are based on specific instances brought to my attention in this province, and I have to ask the minister about his policies which they represent. When an injured, vision-impaired worker can support his family with a job at about $1,600 a month, we applaud him for overcoming his disability. But when that same worker loses his hearing due to noise on the work site, his compensation is exactly the same as any other worker that suffers the same injury but has full sight. Why does the policy of this minister not recognize the special problems associated with individuals that have multiple disabilities that are injured on the work site?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member has a specific case that he is concerned about, a specific individual, I would welcome representations from the honourable member, and I would go to work on that person's case.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've been doing that, and we're not getting a response, which is why we're forced to ask about the policies. We presume that they're being treated in accordance with the policies laid down by this minister. Why is it the policy of this minister, Mr. Speaker, to deny compensation to injured workers when they also happen to be directors of the small business for which they work? Where is the fairness in that policy?
Mr. Speaker, the workers' compensation legislation provides for owner-operators to be covered, to take out personal coverage to a maximum of $40,000 per year. And that is in the legislation, it's in place, and those who take it out are covered by it.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. When a family's son is killed on a drilling rig where safety conditions were inadequate according to the inspector, and they receive only $2,400 in compensation for that death, would the minister finally admit that his policy is clearly not fair, that it's hurtful, and needs to be totally revamped?
No, Mr. Speaker, I will not.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon, then Vermilion Viking.
Mr. Speaker, as any MLA in the House can tell you, one of the big parts of the mail comes with people that are unhappy with workmen's compensation. The board does not allow any outside consultants. Would the minister go far enough to allow those that want to challenge the board decisions to fund or partially fund at least outside consultants or outside advice? It's awful hard to appeal to a compensation board that only listens to itself and its minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are provisions for that right now, such that if an individual worker who is injured wants to go and get a second or a third or a fourth opinion from various other doctors beyond the board, that injured worker has precisely that right to do so.
And Viking, followed by Clover Bar.
Yes, to the minister, supplementary. Could you indicate that whether or not you would be looking at those occupations that have very low accident rates or none over a long track record could be precluded from workmen's compensation and set loose to seek private insurance?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that would violate the the kind of approach that we've been taking for the last number of years with respect to workers' compensation, so that virtually all workers and all employers are covered by no-fault insurance with no recourse to sue. But I take the honourable member's excellent point and suggest that those areas where there are a severe number of accidents and injuries and fatalities, those are where we are dedicating our efforts with respect to inspection, education, and counselling.
Cloverbar.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, we had looked to the Honourable Member from Vermilion at that aspect of it, and we found out that the system in Alberta was the best that we could find any place in the world, so I will give the Minister and the Workmen's Compensation Board that due. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, can the Minister assure the Assembly that the appeal mechanism that so many workers now complain is too long and too cumbersome? Can the Minister have a look to see if that appeal procedure can be tightened up and speeded up so that the worker can get his appeal mechanism in place much more quickly?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have done precisely that in my conversation with the chairman of the board last week, was to ensure that all those workers who had appeals and whose files were complete and had all the information that was necessary to make a decision, that those cases, those workers' files would be looked at in the early part of June.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, main question.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to designate my question to the member from Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's very difficult for small businesses to compete with the publicly funded mega corporations such as Alberta Government Telephones. And while Alberta Government Telephones has a legitimate reason to be in certain commercial enterprises, we are now aware that this company is selling sound systems, intercom systems, which can by no means be considered an appropriate market for a Crown corporation. To the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, why would the government be selling sound systems and intercom equipment when there are plenty of private businesses ready and able to provide this product?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the question from the Honourable Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, Alberta Government Telephones, under questioning by me, has indicated that they are in what I call ancillary service area, partly because of the tie to information processing and the trunk systems. I have pursued that, Mr. Speaker, and have asked that they try to split away the audio portion of those sound systems, especially those that aren't involved with the main component of the telephone system. I imagine the honourable member has further questions, so I'll await some further questions.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear, Mr. Speaker. Could the minister please confirm, therefore, that in the near future, his department or AGT would no longer be in the business of providing sound systems to Southside discotheques, teen clubs, such as the Stardust Teen Club?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in my discussions with the Chairman and the President, and also within the last 6 weeks with the Commission, I actually raised this with the full Commission. I raised it as a significant concern and asked that they examine this whole area, but particularly the audio area. Mr. Speaker, I should indicate that as an MLA and now as Minister responsible, and from many government MLAs, there have been brought to my attention concerns or allegations about competition. I have gone to some lengths to try to sort out competition in what areas, and identified specifically the audio area as one that I felt could be separated from the other areas of competition. Mr. Speaker, I should also indicate that I have, in doing that separation, had meetings with firms in Calgary who were very gracious with their time and sent representatives to a meeting several months ago, 3 months ago I believe it was, and I have commitments to have a meeting with certain firms in the Edmonton area when the pressures of this House do not bear quite as heavily as they do at the moment.
I'm not finished. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the minister please indicate whether his concern with AGT's unfair competition in commercial enterprises, which no public corporation should be involved in, will extend to getting AGT out of selling computers, selling computer software, selling computer maintenance contracts as well? Could you please confirm that?
There are two elements, Mr. Speaker, of the question just raised. First of all, and I think it should be clear that even in the audio area, there are two international corporations of rather large size. In fact, I think both of them larger than Alberta Government Telephones, who would still be involved in that business. So as a question of competition, in terms of largeness of corporations, we should realize that that's what's in the marketplace. But with respect to the electronics data processing, that is a more difficult area, and one that I again have asked them to explore most carefully, because the difficulty we have is that many of the large networks or systems which are being put in place now as part of the telephone system are in fact communications instruments and also data processing instruments at the same time. For instance, the switches which are now being, the new kinds of switches which are being put in place in telephone centrals have a capacity for many other services than traditionally has been regarded as a pure telephone service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the minister please indicate when he expects to have a final decision on those areas that AGT should be involved in and those areas that it shouldn't be involved in, and will that decision involve specific criteria upon which decisions as to what kind of commercial enterprise AGT will be involved in would be based?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm just not sure of the question because of its breadth, but I can say that in terms of a final decision with respect to audio in the rather narrow sense in which this series of questions commenced, I made that final decision and communicated it some time ago. Now, I suppose it will bear watching to see how well executed it is. With respect to the competition in the electronics processing area, that is a more difficult matter, and one which will, I think, for the long foreseeable future, have gray areas, because, in fact, the technology is moving the former telephone functions closer together with data processing functions and information processing. So that, I think, will be a continuing challenge to us to sort out. And it will be so not only in Alberta, but increasingly so in other parts of the world.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Premier, in light of the fact that we're allowing a Crown corporation to compete against the private sector, is the Premier in a position to indicate if and when the government's going to privatize Alberta Government Telephones and let them compete against the big boys?
Mr. Speaker, that's a very good question. I'd welcome during the course of the House the views of members regarding privatization. For my part, the government has put in place a study to see how the privatization might be conducted and whether or not we could provide the service, same cost, perhaps more efficiently even, to the citizens of Alberta.
Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although neither the member for Edmonton Meadowlark nor the TRT minister made specific reference to Altel data, there's no question that it is this specific agency that's engendering so much concern on the part of suppliers of EDP-type equipment. And I'm concerned with the minister's reference, quote, to a continuing challenge to sort out. That has an indefinite end sound to it, and I wondered if we could get a more reassuring response with some specific reference as to when his review of Altel Data's tax-supported competition could be dealt with.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, Altel Data was a manner or concept, a name that was used for certain types of the business activities of Alberta Government Telephones for some period of time. Effective, I believe now 6 months ago, it rolled what was the Altel Data function into a business information component and doesn't separate or break them out in that manner any longer. And that is partly a reflection of the problem that we're all onto here today, which is how to differentiate in a very clear and precise way between communications and data processing. Mr. Speaker, I am very acutely aware of the challenge involved. I have so far been able to find a sharp, definitive distinction and line which I could draw, but I continue to work on it, and I would certainly invite any members to supply any observations or helpful hints that they might have on how we could make sure that Alberta Government Telephones functions with a quality of service and a very vigorous way in those basic systems which I think we fundamentally require for not only small but large businesses in the province, but at the same time leave opportunity for other firms to provide the ancillary services.
Member for Clover, final supplementary on the issue, Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, can the Minister explain why it is the policy of his government in the City of Edmonton to not accept bids for provincial government telecommunications equipment and services from any other supplier than Edmonton Telephones? Why no competition?
Mr. Speaker, the answer is in a memorandum of understanding that was reached. I've forgotten the specific date. My apologies to the House for doing so, but several years ago, as a result of differences between Alberta Government Telephones and Edmonton Telephones, and there was a very is a very specific reference to competition, and that as a consequence of the settlement of that problem, or that portion of that problem, Edmonton Telephones was assured that for a period of 3 years following the settlement, there would not be competition. That period will expire in 1988, and at that point there will be competition to provide services to the provincial government. In every other respect, Mr. Speaker, there is competition currently in the private sector by all telephone companies or other electronic suppliers.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by the member for Calgary-Milliken.
Mr. Speaker, my question to the Honourable Minister of Economic Development, and those of us who support the free enterprise system, sometimes we stand by and we bounce the ball around until somebody goes broke. My question is to the Minister as to the Sprung Family High-Tech Greenhouse in Calgary, which was located on the infamous site, the former Imperial Oil Refinery. Can the Minister indicate, in light of the fact that we've lost that very high technological greenhouse to Newfoundland, what the provincial government did to try and keep that facility here in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, my understanding of the situation, and it may differ from that of the honourable member for Clover Bar, is that the Sprung family, which is a well-known, solid Alberta family that has contributed a great deal, have developed a system that is as advanced as any available in terms of the growing of vegetables under cover. And in the development of that process, they have made a decision that they are prepared to market the technology and develop projects outside of Calgary. In my most recent discussions with Mr. Sprung, he indicated to me that he believes that there is a capability in Canada to support at least 100 similar type of operations. And so I applaud that sort of approach. And in terms of any establishment of one of those systems in the Atlantic provinces, I also applaud the Sprung family for making that move, because obviously the sale of vegetables in fruit and vegetables or vegetables in St. John's wouldn't compete with those that are sold in Calgary. I will be having further discussions with Mr. Sprung in the weeks ahead with respect to the Calgary and Alberta activities.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of the Environment, Sprung blames Imperial Oil blames Calgary. Calgary says the Department of the Environment won't do anything. Who is going to help this particular situation? Somebody should have been responsible, Mr. Minister of the Environment. Who is going to pay for the cleanup of the mess down there?
Mr. Speaker, I think I responded to that several days in the Assembly, but on the 16th day of April, a statement was put out by the task force that was set up to take a look at this whole matter. The task force composed of the City of Calgary, Alberta Environment, Alberta Health Services, and Imperial Oil. And it's further my understanding that the City of Calgary had made an offer available to Sprung Enviroponics several weeks ago that the City of Calgary was prepared to pay for a consultant to review the situation on site.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Economic Development again then, is the Minister in a position to indicate if there's going to be sufficient compensation to the Sprungs so that they can relocate and keep the project in Calgary?
Mr. Speaker, it's a really difficult dilemma faced by the Sprung family because of the dispute with the City of Calgary and Imperial Oil over the problems encountered at that site. And it was raised with me by the member for Calgary-Milliken some time ago in terms of the difficulty, and it's one that evolves around legal responsibility. Notwithstanding that situation, my intention is to again meet with Phil Sprung to further discuss ways that the matter might be resolved.
Mr. Speaker, my last supplementary question to the Minister of Agriculture. Several years ago, it was rumored that the California growing area would be able to supply just the Pacific Northwest, excluding this part of Canada. Is the Minister in a position to indicate if, in light of the fact that we do have the technology available under this new hydroponic system to help alleviate the fact that we cannot grow fruits in the off-season, is the Minister in a position to indicate if he will be encouraging this type of a development to make sure that we are more self-sufficient in fresh fruits for the winter season?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Calgary-Milliken, followed by Edmonton-Glengarry on the supplementary, followed by Calgary-Buffalo, then the main question, Calgary-Milliken.
Thank you. In view of the troubles experienced by Sprung Enviroponics, will the Minister of the Environment now confirm that this situation does underline the need for much more thorough and detailed laws governing site cleanups after decommissioning, and that he will review those laws and soon present the legislature with them?
Mr. Speaker, there is no evidence to suggest at this point in time that the difficulties experienced by Sprung Enviroponics are caused by hydrocarbons from an old refinery site.
To Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, from reports, the Newfoundland government got a piece of the action, by which I mean an equity position in the Sprung development, just as we did some years ago in the Syncrude project. I was wondering whether the Minister might advise as to whether it's government policy to seek such an equity position when we provide financial assistance to developments in this province, or are we going to take all of the risk without getting a share of the benefits, as in the announcement with respect to the magnesium plant and the proposed form of the Husky deal as it was some months ago?
Mr. Speaker, the government does not approach companies and make offers to invest. our approach to economic development is to work with companies to act in a catalytic role and to support their efforts and make judgments on projects based on the best advice that we can get, and that will continue to be the policy that we pursue.
Supplementary, Calgary-Milliken, or main question? Main question. Main question, Calgary-Milliken, followed by Edmonton-Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, when the provincial government shut down the testing lab out at Airdrie, Alberta, the food industry in Calgary and southern Alberta expressed some concerns, and the Minister of Agriculture promised this would be on a trial basis. I wonder if the Honourable Minister of Agriculture could tell the House if he's monitoring this centralizing all the testing way up here in Alberta, and if this is working out satisfactory.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are monitoring it, and it appears to have been working to date very satisfactorily. I should point out to the honourable member that June 19th is the last day of our monitoring process. It was a 60-day trial period. That was the one option we indicated to individuals who did express concerns to us. We are offering air transport of samples, and to date it has worked very well.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. If during this trial period we find that it creates any hardship to any of the food industry in Calgary and southern Alberta, would the minister consider, if there's a hardship, of having the City of Calgary Health Services take over some of this testing?
Mr. Speaker, our purpose in doing this, and I should say at the outset, because of the concern expressed in Calgary, we took the liberty of not only informing the honourable member for Three Hills, but all Calgary members of the Legislative Assembly in all parties, because we believe that we can introduce cost savings and greater efficiencies for those who do wish to have their food samples tested, and by doing so we have more efficient services in the City of Edmonton. But I do share with the honourable member, in the event that there is continued legitimate concern, I have had communication with the Honourable Minister of Community and Occupational Health, whereby we can establish a food testing facility within the public health laboratory within the City of Calgary.
Edmonton-Glengarry, followed by these are supplementaries. Calgary-Buffalo, followed by Calgary-Mountain View. Sorry? Oh, Meadowlark, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, could the Minister please confirm that of the 6 people laid off as a result of closing the lab, 3 were men who were offered placement elsewhere, 3 were women who were initially not offered placement anywhere else, and finally 1 got a job by taking the initiative to transfer herself to Edmonton?
Mr. Speaker, there were some allegations as to discrimination as to sex, which were totally false. We are following them up, and there is a possibility of some court action, so it would be very unwise for us to further pursue this within this Assembly. But I want to leave the assurance with the honourable member and the Legislative Assembly that we want to do everything within our power to make sure that those whose positions have been declared redundant do and are offered positions within our own department, and we are taking that extra step to make sure that they can enjoy a livelihood, because they have offered such a valuable service to the department and the people of the province in the past.
Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister has indicated that samples were flown to Edmonton in order to ensure a true comparison and in order to be able to verify that those samples did not deteriorate due to the travel or the time before they were being tested. What were the controls in place in order to make that comparison with the samples in Edmonton, and were there sampling done in Calgary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we maintained a presence in the Airdrie laboratory, and in some samples we did have dual sampling of the process so that we could check to make sure that there was an accuracy to our system. We did follow through with the suggestion of the honourable member, and to date it has shown that there is an accuracy within the system, and the samples are being processed as they should.
Edmonton-Glengarry, followed by Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the Minister of Community and Occupational Health, Mr. Speaker, complaints have been brought to our attention that a medicine hat firm, Altec Sanitation, which has a contract with Department of National Defence to transport hazardous waste, including lead, acid, and solvents, has failed to provide its employees with proper protective clothing to ensure their safety, and has used the same trucks which transport hazardous waste without flushing them to drain septic tanks and put contents on fields or into the Medicine Hat sewage system. To the Minister, has the Minister received such complaints? And if he has, will he advise the Assembly what action his department has taken? And if he is not aware of the situation, will he now undertake to investigate this and report back to the House?
Mr. Speaker, I am not aware of the incident in question. Appreciate the representation by the member. I'll take it under advisement and report back to the Assembly.
Thank you. Will the Minister assure the Assembly that his investigation of this matter will include more than just a phone call to company officials, and will in fact include sewage and soil testing, inspection of vehicles, and interviews directly with present and recently employed drivers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, I would look into the incident and report back to the Assembly when I've got information.
Okay, thank you. To the Minister of the Environment in that case, has the Minister done a thorough on-site inspection to determine whether or not the storage of chemicals in rail cars at this site is a contravention of Section 11 of the Hazardous Chemicals Act regulations, which require a primary tank and surrounding secondary containment arrangements? And I do know this department is aware of the situation.
Mr. Speaker, I'll accept that question, subject to my review.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the Minister has initiated any testing, especially soil testing, near the rail cars used for storage to prove or disprove reports brought to his department through their pollution hotline of frequent spillage, and if not, will he undertake to do so soon?
Mr. Speaker, the pollution emergency response number is one that's contained in the front page of all telephone books in the province. And we get calls on a 24-hour-a-day basis, and all calls are referred for immediate follow-up.
Westlock Sturgeon supplementary question.
Back to the original minister, Mr. Speaker. In view of the fact that the hazardous waste plant is now opened up to take on product, could he tell us where the case of the transportation of hazardous waste shortcuts to use a municipal highway, say without shoulders or improperly laid out municipal highways, does that fall under your minister's jurisdiction, or does that come under the Minister of Environment?
Mr. Speaker, I'm well aware of the honourable member's concern and alleged interest in this, but I would happily refer that question to my colleague, the Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, to supplement, the information provided to the Assembly by the member from Westlock Sturgeon is incorrect. The Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation in Swan Hills is only in a test period at the moment. It is not open to the receiving of hazardous or toxic materials in the province in Alberta other than a selected number of transformers that have been there to, in fact, test up that particular arrangement.
To the Clover Bar.
Minister of the Environment, is it true that the Bill and Bill shows say that all the roads are paved in the constituency of Barhead?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of my record as a member of the Legislative Assembly in dealing with the needs of the constituents of the people who live within the area known as the constituency of Barhead. It's my hope and my intent that should I live long enough, that virtually every road in my constituency will be paved. That is a commitment to my constituents.
Spoken like a true rural MLA, no matter what party. The member for Calgary Buffalo, followed by Calgary Glenmore.
This is to the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker. Police report that it's becoming more and more common for individuals to pack knives which are pulled out and used at the slightest affront. In 1986, in our two largest cities, somebody was stabbed approximately an average of once every 2 days. It's becoming an epidemic and an increasing danger to all citizens who get into any kind of verbal confrontation. And to the Attorney General, has the Minister had any discussions with police and or the federal government with respect to means of combating this alarming trend?
Mr. Speaker, I also read the Calgary Herald on the weekend and noted the story. which is obviously the source of the honourable member's research. It is a difficult situation relative to the subject of when one carries a knife for illegal purposes and how to determine that. There are, of course, certain knives which are banned officially in the criminal code, but as all honourable members will be aware, each of us is in possession of knives, and large numbers of them, no doubt. And therefore it becomes a very difficult question as to how to determine when a knife is going to be used or is being carried for an illegal purpose.
In this case, as in many others, Mr. Speaker, the press follows my interest in issues. I have here an extensive report that I had done in April, and I'd be happy to give the minister access to it. And if the minister is aware and if concerned and if the matter is under discussion, is it the government's opinion that it would be useful to seek increased criminal penalties for assaults involving knives or offences in which knives are used?
If the honourable member was concerned about the matter and did not bring it to my attention until now, I regard that as regrettable. I would say, Mr. Speaker, that I will discuss matters of this kind with the Attorney General for Canada and other Attorneys General at our next meeting, which will take place towards the end of the month. And I would suggest, however, that it is a criminal code matter as to whether or not new definitions as to the use of knives or the carrying of knives should become subject to more clearly defined limits in the criminal code.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I brought a number of issues to the minister's attention for which nothing was done, and I find that regrettable. To the Honourable Solicitor General, many hotel owners are trying to control the use of knives in beverage rooms. Why has the government not provided in the Liquor Control Act for a prohibition or a checking of knives in all licensed premises?
Mr. Speaker, I find that in the beverage room we must supply meals, and usually you would require a knife as well as a fork, and you may have difficulty in checking the same.
That was not the answer I was seeking, Mr. Speaker, but much appreciated, notwithstanding the paucity of hard information. To the Attorney General, with further comment along the same lines from the Solicitor General, if he's up to it, will the ministers undertake to make this issue a priority and report to the House next session about what initiatives can be taken to deal with this frightening trend, which must be of concern to all aware Albertans?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Solicitor General has said, and as I've said as well, all of us, every individual Albertan, owns knives of a wide variety, which are capable of injuring people. There are certain kinds of knives, however, which are obviously designed for the purpose of carrying out criminal acts, and those are banned under the Criminal Code of Canada today. The question of enforcement becomes one of considerable difficulty, and there are a number of knives that are carried by people quite legitimately when, for example, a person is engaged in hunting. And it becomes a very real dilemma for the law enforcement officers to determine when a knife is being carried for an illegal purpose, a knife that is not now prohibited for ownership. It is therefore something that, while it is regrettable that these are being used for offensive weapons, it is also true that knives of many shapes and kinds are readily available throughout the average department store and many other places. and it is going to have to be a matter that the police will have to use their discretion in determining whether or not knives are being carried for illegal or legal purposes. And I will, of course, as I have indicated, take this up with my colleagues in other provinces and the Federal Minister of Justice at our next meeting later this month.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions, and also to have one minister give a brief correction to a statement made on an earlier day? Opposed? Carried. Supplementary information.
Mr. Speaker, I do appreciate the concern the member has in this instance, and I might point out that as of this morning, I've asked my department to do a polling of all the police forces in Alberta to find out what type of knife and the number of incidences where knives are utilized or purported to be utilized, and I'd be happy to share that information with the member.
Final supplementary. Member for Edmonton Strathcona, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Attorney General considered floating the idea of harsher sentences where knives are used in the commission of a crime?
Mr. Speaker, that of course is a matter that can be discussed and will be discussed when I deal with the matter with the Federal Minister in terms of the criminal code sanctions and the level of penalties which are now provided for in the Federal Criminal Code. That, of course, is something that is also the prerogative of the courts to a considerable extent in determining the type of sentence which is passed by the courts relative to the seriousness of the crime in which the knife may be used. And that is something that, of course, the court should take notice of in view of the facts which have already been referred to earlier in question period by way of questions and by way of the answers provided today.
Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on May 8th in this Assembly, during discussion in question period on employment statistics, I indicated that, quote, Alberta has moved from the 5th highest rate of unemployment to 4th. I wish to correct that statement, Mr. Speaker, and indicate to you that, in fact, Alberta has the 4th lowest rate of employment in Canada in April of 1987, having been tied for 4th with Quebec in February.
Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly to the introduction?